In professional wrestling, becoming the world heavyweight champion is supposed to be the pinnacle. It's the culmination of a life's work, a moment of triumph and glory that gets etched forever in the history books. For some, it's a coronation that launches a dynasty. For others, it's the satisfying final chapter to a hard-fought career. But for the living legend Larry Zbyszko, when he finally reached the top of the American Wrestling Association in 1989, it was something else entirely. It wasn't a victory, it was an inheritance. And what he inherited was a throne of ashes in an empire that had already been defeated, its walls crumbling and its subjects long gone. This is the story of the last champion of a dead empire, a man who held wrestling's most paradoxical prize, a world title for a world that no longer existed. This is Larry Zbyszko. On February 7th, 1989, he won the AWA World Heavyweight Championship. But this wasn't some glorious coronation in a sold-out arena. It was the last, desperate gasp of a dying promotion. His reign wouldn't be remembered for legendary defenses in packed stadiums, but for the quiet, hollow echo of his boots in half-empty halls. He was a king, but his kingdom was a ghost town, a monument to a bygone era. To understand how a world championship, a belt once held by giants of the industry, could become a relic in the hands of its active champion, you first have to understand what the AWA was and what it had become. The American Wrestling Association, born in 1960 from a split with the powerful National Wrestling Alliance, was a pillar of the wrestling world for decades. Promoter and champion Verne Gagne built his Minneapolis-based territory into a powerhouse, a kingdom of technical wrestling respected across the globe. The AWA wasn't just a promotion, it was a star factory. Legends were forged in its ring. Hulk Hogan, Jesse "The Body" Ventura, Mean Gene Okerlund, Bobby "The Brain" Heenan, the Road Warriors, and so many others walked its aisles before becoming household names. The AWA was the land of serious, credible, athletic competition. Gagne, a decorated amateur himself, prized legitimate wrestling skill above all else. His champions, like the masterful Nick Bockwinkel, were chess players in trunks. For over 2 decades, this philosophy made the AWA a dominant force. But as the 70s bled into the 80s, the ground beneath Verne Gagne's feet started to shift. A new philosophy was taking hold, championed by a young, ambitious promoter on the East Coast named Vince McMahon. McMahon didn't just want a territory, he wanted to conquer the world. He saw wrestling not just as a sport, but as sports entertainment. He valued charisma and pyrotechnics as much, if not more, than technical ability. And in Verne Gagne's own backyard, he found the perfect weapon for his revolution: Hulk Hogan. Hogan, with his 24-inch pythons and magnetic charisma, was a sensation in the AWA. The fans adored him, packing arenas and begging Gagne to put the AWA World Heavyweight Championship on their hero. But Gagne hesitated. In his traditionalist view, Hogan was a showman, not a true technical wrestler fit to carry the belt. This clash of philosophies would become the AWA's fatal flaw. Frustrated and lured by McMahon's grand vision, Hogan left the AWA in late 1983. A few weeks later, on January 23, 1984, he defeated the Iron Sheik at Madison Square Garden to become the WWF champion, and Hulkamania started running wild across the globe. It was the first crack in the foundation of the AWA empire, and it was a deep one. Gagne had fundamentally misread his audience. He had a winning lottery ticket and refused to cash it. Hogan's departure wasn't just the loss of a star, it was the start of a mass exodus. One by one, the AWA's top talents were poached by the WWF's expanding machine. Mean Gene Okerlund, Bobby Heenan, Jesse Ventura, all gone. Each departure was another brick pulled from the crumbling walls of Gagne's kingdom. By the late 1980s, the AWA was a shell of its former self. The crowds dwindled, the arenas got smaller, the TV production looked cheap and dated. In a desperate attempt to recapture the public's imagination, the AWA launched the infamous Team Challenge series. Kicking off in 1989, the series divided the entire roster into 3 teams: Larry's Legends, Sergeant Snipers, and Baron's Blitzers, all competing for a supposed $1 million prize. It was a convoluted mess, featuring absurd gimmick matches like the Great American Turkey Hunt. Due to poor attendance, many of these matches were taped in a nearly empty, bizarrely pink-walled TV studio, which only amplified the promotion's dire situation. The Team Challenge series wasn't a bold new idea. It was a cry for help from a promotion that had lost its way. It was into this dying, desolate kingdom that a new champion was about to be crowned. To be the champion of a promotion in its death throes, you don't need a white knight. You need a survivor. And in the late 1980s, there were few greater survivors than Larry Zbyszko. Zbyszko was a veteran who had carved out a remarkable career built on pure, unadulterated heel psychology. He was a master manipulator of audience emotion. He had earned his moniker, the Living Legend, through one of the most iconic feuds of the era. In the late 1970s, Zbyszko was the protege of the beloved champion Bruno Sammartino, but the student grew restless. On a fateful night in 1980, after an exhibition match, Zbyszko brutally turned on his mentor, smashing a wooden chair over Sammartino's head and becoming one of the most hated men in wrestling. The feud that followed was legendary, culminating in a steel cage match at Shea Stadium that drew a massive crowd of over 35,000 fans. Bruno won the match, but Zbyszko won the war. He had used Bruno's fame to forge his own, becoming a main event villain. Throughout the 80s, Zbyszko honed his craft, including a previous stint in the AWA. He was a thinking man's heel, a master of stalling and antagonizing the crowd. He would boast in his promos that he had retired not only Bruno, but also AWA legend Nick Bockwinkel, cementing his persona as a legend killer. By 1989, he was back in the AWA, one of the few recognizable names left. He was the right man, but he had arrived at precisely the wrong time. The AWA World Heavyweight Championship had been vacated after the promotion severed ties with Jerry the King Lawler. They desperately needed a credible champion. So, on February 7, 1989, in St. Paul, Minnesota, an 18-man battle royal was held to crown a new king. The lineup for that battle royal told the story of the AWA's decline. Gone were the days of a ring filled with future Hall of Famers. Instead, it was a mix of aging veterans, mid-card journeymen, and unproven talents. Zbyszko entered the match and wrestled it the only way he knew how, with his brain. While others brawled, Zbyszko used his signature stalling tactics, letting his opponents eliminate each other. Finally, only 2 men remained: the wily veteran Larry Zbyszko and the athletic up-and-comer Tom Zenk. What happened next was bizarre and perfectly AWA in its late-stage confusion. The over-the-top rope battle royal suddenly became a conventional wrestling match with pinfalls and a referee. Ultimately, Zbyszko managed to send Zenk over the top rope to the floor, securing the victory and the AWA World Heavyweight Championship. There was no massive explosion of confetti or a thunderous roar from the crowd. It was a strangely muted victory. Larry Zbyszko was a World Heavyweight Champion, but as he held the belt aloft, he was a king surveying a diminished and desolate realm. Larry Zbyszko's first reign as AWA World Heavyweight Champion began not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a promotion on life support. He was the champion, but the pyramid he stood on was crumbling into dust. A champion is defined by his challengers, and Zbyszko's opponents painted a vivid picture of the AWA's depleted roster. He defended the title against aging legends like Wahoo McDaniel, fellow veteran Sergeant Slaughter. He was a big fish in a rapidly evaporating pond. The World Heavyweight Champion was defending his title in small Midwestern towns to dwindling crowds. In a bizarre twist, Zbyszko's first reign ended not in America, but in the Tokyo Dome. On February 10, 1990, he lost the title to Japanese legend Mr. Saito. It was a strategic move to maintain some international credibility, But at the time, the title change wasn't consistently presented to US audiences, adding to the general confusion surrounding the AWA. Just 2 months later, on April 8, 1990, at an event in St. Paul, sometimes referred to as Super Clash 4, Zbyszko regained the championship from Saito. He was once again the AWA World Heavyweight Champion, but the promotion was in even worse shape. The Team Challenge series was in full swing, a constant confusing backdrop to his reign. He was both the captain of Larry's Legends and the world champion, a blurring of lines that diminished both roles. His second reign was much like his first, a lonely procession of defenses against a threadbare roster, facing men like the Trooper and Nikita Koloff. As 1990 wore on, the writing was on the wall. The AWA was running on fumes, hemorrhaging money with no end in sight. For Larry Zbyszko, it must have been a profoundly surreal experience. He had one of the most prestigious belts in wrestling history, but he was the champion of nothing. His kingdom had no subjects, his court was empty, and his title was becoming little more than a historical artifact. The end of his reign was as unceremonious as the reign itself. In late 1990, Zbyszko, ever the pragmatist, accepted an offer from World Championship Wrestling, WCW. It was a smart career move, but it was the final death knell for the AWA. In December 1990, the AWA officially stripped the departed Zbyszko of the World Heavyweight Championship. But there would be no tournament to crown a new champion. The belt was simply retired. The reign of the last champion was over, not with a 3 count, but with a press release. With Larry Zbyszko's departure, the American Wrestling Association effectively ceased to exist. The promotion that had once been a titan of the industry went out with a whimper. By 1991, the AWA was finished, officially filing for bankruptcy and bringing a 31-year history to a quiet end. The empire was officially dead. So what is the legacy of its final champion? For Larry Zbyszko, his time as AWA champion is a complex chapter in a Hall of Fame career. He was a credible, deserving champion who had paid his dues. Had he won the title 5 years earlier, his reign might be remembered as a classic. Instead, it's often seen as a footnote to the collapse of the very promotion he led. He was the right man at the wrong time. His old-school style was a perfect fit for the AWA's traditional ethos, but that ethos was precisely what was sinking the company. He held the top prize, but the infrastructure around him had decayed to the point where the prize itself had lost its value. After leaving the AWA, Zbyszko had a successful run in WCW, first as a wrestler and later as a sharp color commentator. He won tag team and television gold, proving he was still a valuable performer. In 2015, his career was rightfully recognized with an induction into the WWE Hall of Fame, presented by the very man he once betrayed, Bruno Sammartino. But his time as the final AWA champion remains his most unique accomplishment. Across 2 reigns totaling hundreds of days, he stood as the final, quiet punctuation mark on the epic story of the AWA. It represented the end of the territory system, the last gasp of an old way of doing business. Larry Zbyszko didn't just inherit a title, he inherited the end of an era. He wore a crown, but it was a hollow one. He sat on a throne, but it was in a graveyard. He is the living legend, and for a time, he was the last, lonely guardian of a dead empire. If you enjoyed this look back at a unique chapter in wrestling history, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have new wrestling documentaries and deep dives coming out all the time. Let us know in the comments, what are your memories of the final days of the AWA? Until next time, thanks for watching.